A police officer took his blind daughter to adopt a guide dog, but the broken K-9 and Kennel 12 would change everything. He never imagined that a visit to the municipal kennel would transform not only his daughter's life, but his own path as a man of the law. Fate had arranged an encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew about loyalty, healing, and second chances. The harsh Ridgefield winter had draped the small Colorado town in a thick mantle of snow. White flecks drifted down slowly, as if time itself had slowed on that frigid morning. Aaron Blake adjusted the scarf around his daughter's neck before they stepped out of the car parked in front of the municipal animal shelter. The local deputy, his shoulders tense and his gaze vigilant, held Laya's hand tightly as they walked along the partially cleared path. "Are you ready?" Aaron asked, his voice betraying a mix of hope and apprehension. Ever since the accident that had stolen his daughter's sight, every new step felt like a chasm to be crossed. Laya Blake nodded, her young face set with a determination that contrasted with her apparent fragility. "I'm ready, Dad," she replied, gripping her cane a little tighter. She had spent weeks researching guide dogs, convincing her father this was the way to reclaim a piece of her lost independence. As they entered the building, the sharp scent of disinfectant mingled with the distinct odor of animals. Joanna, a middle-aged woman with graying hair tied in a bun, greeted them with a warm smile that turned to one of respect when she noticed the badge partially visible on Aaron's coat. "Deputy Blake, good to see you. And this must be Laya," she said, guiding them down the main corridor. "We have a few pups in training specifically for assistance. They're right at the end of the hall." The noise was overwhelming. Anxious barks echoed off the walls as paws scratched at metal grates. Some dogs jumped with excitement at the sight of visitors. Others barked for attention. Laya walked slowly, absorbing every sound, every vibration, every subtle shift in the air around her. They passed several kennels where puppies and adult dogs alike vied for their attention. Joanna explained the characteristics of each potential match, but something strange happened as they neared the end of the corridor. Laya stopped abruptly, as if pulled by an invisible force. "There's someone in there," she said, turning toward a nearly hidden enclosure marked with the number 12. Unlike the other spaces, this one was cloaked in absolute silence. Joanna hesitated, exchanging a worried glance with Aaron. "Yes," she confirmed. "That's Shadow. He's a German Shepherd, a former police K-9. He doesn't interact with anyone anymore." Laya took a step toward the kennel. Deep in the dark enclosure, almost invisible to a sighted person, lay a large German Shepherd. The animal was completely still, as if it had given up on the world around it. Its eyes, though open, seemed devoid of any emotion or interest. "Can I get closer?" Laya asked, her hand already reaching toward the bars. Aaron felt his chest tighten, torn between protecting his daughter and respecting her curiosity. This was not the kind of dog they had come for, but something about Laya's instant connection with the silent animal left him speechless. Joanna adjusted her glasses and shook her head as she led Aaron Blake and his daughter down the shelter's damp corridor. The enthusiastic barks from the other dogs stood in stark contrast to the absolute silence emanating from Kennel 12. "This is Shadow," the employee explained in a low voice, gesturing toward the German Shepherd lying in the darkest corner of the enclosure. He was an exceptional K-9, but ever since he lost his partner in the line of duty, he hasn't responded to anyone. We've tried everything. The deputy observed the animal with a critical eye. Its dark coat was dull, and its amber eyes stared into the void with a sadness Aaron recognized immediately. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. He wouldn't be suitable as a guide dog, Joanna continued, adjusting the name tag on her uniform. Perhaps we should look at the puppies being specifically trained for. But Laya had already moved to the gate. Her slender fingers touched the cold metal bars as she tilted her head, as if she could see past the darkness that surrounded her. May I go in? She asked, her soft voice cutting through the tension. Laya, I don't think that's a good idea, Aaron intervened, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Please, Dad, just for a minute. Joanna hesitated, but something in the girl's quiet resolve made her relent. With a sigh, she unlocked the kennel door. The deputy stepped forward, ready to intervene, but the shelter worker stopped him with a gesture. Laya entered slowly, using her cane to map the space. When she found the corner where Shadow remained motionless, she crouched down carefully. The silence was absolute. Even the other dogs seemed to have stopped barking. Hello, Shadow, she whispered, holding her hand out in the air a few inches from the dog. You don't have to be afraid. I'm not. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Aaron held his breath, torn between his instinct to protect his daughter and his fascination with the moment he was witnessing. Then, almost imperceptibly, the German shepherd lifted its head. Its once empty eyes focused on the girl for the first time. With slow, cautious movements, Shadow rose to his feet, stretching his neck until his nose gently touched Laya's outstretched palm. Joanna let out a soft gasp of astonishment. That's the first time he's interacted with anyone in months, she murmured in disbelief. A smile lit up Laya's face as she felt the damp touch on her hand. In that silent instant, something profound and inexplicable formed between the girl who could not see and the dog who had refused to be seen. An invisible bond that no one present could explain, but everyone could feel. Aaron Blake shook his head, his concern plain on his face. As Joanna explained Shadow's history, the deputy felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The dog had been an exemplary K-9, but after losing his partner, he'd become withdrawn and unpredictable. Laya, I really don't think this is a good idea, he murmured, running a hand through his hair. Shadow was trained for high-risk situations, not to be a guide dog. We need an animal that's been specifically prepared for this. The shelter worker agreed, producing a folder with behavioral reports. He's rejected every attempt at rehabilitation. 3 families have tried to adopt him in the last few months, but they all brought him back. Laya, however, was resolute. Her delicate fingers stroked the German shepherd's fur. The dog kept its nose pressed against her leg, as if it already recognized her as its protector. Dad, she said, her voice soft but firm. He's alone, like I felt after the accident. We understand each other. Aaron felt a lump form in his throat. Ever since his daughter's loss of vision, he had desperately searched for ways to rebuild her world. But now, seeing the immediate connection between the girl and the traumatized animal, something shifted in his own heart. What if he has a setback? What if he can't adapt to our life? He questioned, still resistant. We'll give him time, Laya replied, with a wisdom beyond her years. Just like you gave me time. Those words disarmed his every defense. The deputy took a deep breath, his chest tight with a mixture of fear and hope. He looked at Joanna, who awaited his final decision. We'll take Shadow, he declared at last. The woman looked surprised, but made no attempt to dissuade him. She brought the adoption forms, explaining the procedures as Aaron filled out the papers with a slightly trembling hand. As they finished, other employees and volunteers gathered to witness the moment. their expressions a mix of disbelief and timid hope. No one believed Shadow could be rehabilitated, much less find a permanent home. Joanna smiled discreetly as she watched Laya lead the animal outside, using only soft, verbal commands. Sometimes, she whispered to Aaron, it's the broken ones who understand each other best. The deputy nodded silently as they walked to the parking lot. Watching his daughter and the traumatized dog side by side, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this unexpected decision could be the beginning of healing for all of them. The first night at the Blake house was marked by a tense silence. Shadow, the German shepherd, who had so long served as a police K-9, now huddled under the kitchen table, his eyes tracking every movement, his ears perking at the slightest sound. The animal trembled faintly whenever Aaron Blake walked past, as if expecting punishment or abandonment. Laya sensed the dog's discomfort without seeing it. Her delicate fingers traced the cold floor until they found the spot where Shadow was hiding. With gentle movements, she placed a soft blanket near him, never forcing an approach. He needs time, Dad, the girl whispered, as her hands found their way to the piano in the living room. Just like us. The deputy watched his daughter, a knot in his throat. Laya's maturity always surprised him, especially after the accident. He prepared a bowl of food and fresh water, placing them near the dog's hiding spot, but Shadow remained motionless, refusing to eat. As the night deepened and the snow began to fall more heavily outside, Laya sat down at the instrument. Her fingers found a few hesitant notes, as if relearning a long-forgotten language. A simple melody floated through the house, filling the empty corners with something that had long been missing from their home. Hope. Aaron leaned against the doorframe, watching. A part of him feared the dog might react badly to the sound, but to his surprise, Shadow's ears twitched toward the music. The dog lifted its head slightly. Laya continued to play, each note more confident than the last. It wasn't an elaborate piece, just a sequence of chords her mother had taught her years ago. As snowflakes danced outside the window, something extraordinary happened. Shadow slowly emerged from his hiding place. With cautious steps, he approached the bowl and ate a few bites. It wasn't much, but for an animal that had refused food for months, it was a miracle. The deputy felt his heart torn. There was hope in that moment, the same hope he saw in his daughter's sightless eyes. But the fear remained, rooted deep in his chest. What if Shadow couldn't adapt? What if he couldn't protect Laya? The music played on into the night, as their first winter together announced itself through the window pane. 3 broken souls under one roof, each carrying their own scars, finding in the silent presence of the others a first, fragile comfort. The silence in the Blake house was almost palpable. Aaron Blake would spend hours in his study, reviewing police reports or simply staring at the wall. Whenever he passed Laya in the hallway, his heart would ache. Every hesitant gesture his daughter made was a painful reminder of the accident, of his wife's absence, of the responsibilities he now carried alone. "Good morning, Dad," Laya would say each morning, her soft voice cutting through the cold kitchen air. The deputy would answer in monosyllables, unable to manage more than a "morning" or "Are you hungry?" He would prepare breakfast, leave it on the table, and often invent an excuse to leave for work early. Their superficial conversations about the weather or daily chores were a flimsy facade for the chasm growing between them. Aaron wondered how to comfort someone when he himself felt shattered inside. How could he speak of hope when guilt consumed him with every breath? He watched his daughter from a distance, admiring her strength, but unable to express any emotion beyond constant worry. Laya sensed it all. Her other senses, sharpened by blindness, picked up on the tension in her father's footsteps, the restrained breath he took when she came near, the smell of strong coffee in the pre-dawn hours when he couldn't sleep. The teenager understood his pain, but she didn't know how to reach him. Instead of pressing him, she found refuge in Shadow's quiet presence. "You know what it's like to lose someone too, don't you?" she would whisper to the German shepherd, stroking his coarse fur. The dog, once reluctant to be touched, now allowed her to draw close. Laya spent hours sitting on the living room floor, telling the dog stories or simply sharing the silence with him. There was something comforting about being with someone who didn't demand words. Shadow didn't ask for explanations, offer empty advice, or treat her like she was made of glass. He was simply there, breathing calmly beside her, sometimes resting his muzzle on her hand when he sensed she was sad. "We're alike," Leia would tell the dog. "We're both learning to live in a new world." And while Aaron drowned in his guilt, unable to reach out to his own daughter, she found in Shadow a mirror of her own loneliness, and paradoxically, a way out of it. At night, when she played a few notes on the piano, Laya could feel the comforting weight of the dog lying at her feet. Across the house, Aaron would hear the soft melody and close his eyes, wishing he had the courage to walk down the hall and simply hold her. The scent of cinnamon and apple began to fill the Blake house as spring finally started to blossom in Ridgefield. The snow melted slowly, revealing the timid green that had been hiding beneath winter's white blanket. It was during this time that Nora Green, their next-door neighbor, became a part of their lives. With a still warm pie plate in her hands, the woman knocked on their door one Sunday afternoon. Aaron Blake answered, surprised by the gesture, but grateful for a kindness that was becoming more and more frequent. "I thought you two might enjoy something sweet today," she said, handing the pie to the police chief. "How is little Leia?" Aaron invited his neighbor inside, explaining that his daughter was in the backyard with Shadow. Through the kitchen window, Nora watched the scene unfolding outside. The girl sat on the grass, the German shepherd lying beside her, completely attuned to her every move. "It's extraordinary," the woman commented, adjusting her glasses. "That animal won't let anyone else near him," Aaron replied, pouring coffee for his visitor. "But with my daughter, they have a connection I can't explain." His neighbor smiled, her eyes revealing the wisdom of a life fully lived. Since losing her husband 3 years ago, Nora had found comfort in caring for others. The solitude of her empty house pushed her outward, in search of connection. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Green became a constant presence. She brought not only homemade treats, but also stories and words of comfort. She noticed how Shadow, once considered beyond saving, now followed Leia like a protective shadow, responding only to the girl's gentle commands. One particularly sunny afternoon, while Aaron was at work, Nora arrived with a small, wrapped gift. "I found this among my husband's things," she explained, placing a delicate pendant in Laya's hands. "It's silver. There's an inscription." The girl ran her fingers over the cool surface of the metal, feeling each carved letter. "Love sees beyond the eyes," she read aloud, a smile lighting up her face. "It's beautiful, Mrs. Green." "I thought it should be yours," the woman replied, helping her fasten the necklace. "You remind me that there are so many ways of seeing the world." Shadow drew closer, curiously sniffing the pendant that now rested against Leia's chest. The girl stroked the dog's head as Nora watched, moved by the invisible bond that united two wounded but healing souls. The sound of Shadow's paws following Leia through the rooms of the house became a familiar morning rhythm in Ridgefield. After weeks of living together, the German Shepherd had established a routine. Wherever the girl went, he followed, a protective shadow that had finally found its purpose. He was no longer the downcast animal from cell 12, but a guardian, attentive to his new companion's every move. Leia Blake felt the gradual change in the dog's behavior. As she slid her fingers along the staircase banister, she could feel his steady breath close by. "Good morning, friend," she would whisper each day, and the animal would respond with a brief nuzzle of his snout against her hand. Their piano sessions became a favorite time for them both. While the young girl played soft melodies, Shadow would settle beside the instrument, his entire body visibly relaxing. The animal's once tense frame seemed to surrender to the rhythm of the notes, as if the music were a balm for his own invisible wounds. "He's never this calm with anyone else," Mrs. Green remarked one afternoon, as she served cinnamon cookies in the Blakes' living room. "It's as if you two speak the same language." It was this observation that inspired Laya to develop a unique training system. With patience, she began using voice commands in a low, almost whispered tone, complemented by small vibrations on the dog's collar. A gentle touch meant stop, two quick touches meant turn right, and a long touch meant stay alert. "I think he understands better when we don't shout," the girl explained to her father one evening. "Maybe because he also knows what it feels like to be lost." Aaron watched in awe as his daughter and the dog developed their own language, one made of subtle gestures and genuine affection. When Laya needed to find something, a specific command was all it took for Shadow to guide her with surprising precision. The transformation was clear to everyone. The animal that shelter workers had deemed unrecoverable was now attentive and responsive, not with just anyone, only with Laya. Between them, a bond based on mutual respect was growing, as if they both recognized a similar pain in each other and, together, were finding the way to heal. "It's incredible," commented Joanna when she visited the family to check on the adoption's progress. "I've never seen Shadow react like this with anyone since he lost his partner." For Leia, however, there was nothing extraordinary about it. She simply understood that sometimes the deepest connections are born from shared silence, small daily kindnesses, and the patience to wait for another to be ready to trust again. In the early morning hours, Aaron Blake watched from the kitchen window as he drank his coffee. Outside, in the dew-covered yard, Laya walked with Shadow, her delicate hands holding loosely to the leash. The chief noticed how the German shepherd adjusted his pace to the girl's, stopping when she stopped, guiding her around obstacles she couldn't see. "Incredible," he murmured to himself, remembering the listless creature they had brought home from the municipal shelter weeks ago. The dog Joanna had described as beyond saving now moved with purpose, as if he had found a new mission. Aaron placed his mug in the sink and sighed deeply. His chest still tightened when he thought of the accident, the sirens, the screams, the devastating silence that followed. As a police chief, he was used to protecting others, but he had failed to protect his own family when it mattered most. He watched Laya smile as she stroked Shadow's fur. She seemed more confident now, more independent. A part of him felt proud of this progress, but another part, the one that still woke up sweating in the middle of the night, feared this confidence could put her in danger. "Dad, are you there?" Leia called, turning toward the house with surprising accuracy. "I'm here," he answered, opening the back door. "How did you know?" "He always knows when you're watching." The chief approached cautiously. He still didn't feel completely at ease around the animal, despite the obvious progress. "He's doing well," he commented, keeping a safe distance. "He's perfect," Laya corrected, with a determination that reminded him so much of her mother. He just needed someone to believe in him. Aaron swallowed hard. His daughter's words carried a weight she probably didn't realize. He wanted to say so much about guilt, fear, regret, but the words were stuck in his throat. Mrs. Green waved from the neighboring yard, interrupting his thoughts. "Good morning, family. What a beautiful sight." The man forced a smile and waved back. His neighbor was right. It was a beautiful sight. But as he went back inside to get his badge, the familiar weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. Letting his guard down meant taking a risk, and he had already lost too much. That night, passing Laya's room, he saw Shadow lying at the foot of her bed, his alert eyes fixed on the door. The dog didn't sleep until she had fallen asleep. Aaron recognized something familiar in that gaze, the same constant vigilance he himself maintained. "Watch over her," he whispered to the animal, receiving a slight dip of the head in response. For a fleeting moment, he felt he could perhaps trust the dog, but only for a moment. The darkness of night in Ridgefield brought more than just silence. For Shadow, it also brought the ghosts of a past that refused to fade. In his third week at the Blake house, the German Shepherd began awake in the middle of the night, trembling violently. His low, pained whimpers echoed through the house, as if he were reliving some deep trauma. Laya Blake, awakened by the anguished sounds, would feel her way down the hall until she found him. Without hesitation, the girl would sit on the cold floor beside him as Shadow cowered against the living room wall. "It's okay," she would whisper, reaching out a hand to find the dog's soft fur. "I have nightmares sometimes, too." The young girl began to sing a soft melody her mother used to hum when she was afraid of the dark. Before the accident, before the darkness became permanent, it was a simple song about stars and hope, and her delicate voice filled the empty spaces of the house. Aaron watched from the doorway, never interfering. The chief noticed how the animal, once rigid and defensive, gradually relaxed at the sound of his daughter's voice. It was as if Shadow understood he wasn't alone in his suffering. "You know," Laya said between verses of the song, "we both carry scars that no one can see." Her fingers found an uneven patch in Shadow's coat, likely an old battle wound. "The difference is now we can help each other." As the nights went on, a routine was established. When Shadow woke up scared, Laya would appear with a blanket and her calming presence. Sometimes she brought small pieces of food or simply sat in silence, letting the animal feel she was there. Mrs. Green, who occasionally stopped by to leave some homemade treat, commented to Aaron about the visible change in the dog's behavior. "That girl has a gift," the neighbor said, watching from the window as Laya guided Shadow through the yard using only soft vocal commands. "She is teaching that animal to trust again." What no one expected was that Shadow would begin to return the favor. When Laya stumbled, he was there, a steady presence against her leg. When she needed to find something, the dog guided her with gentle nudges. It was as if they were both learning a new language. He helped her navigate the physical world, and she guided him out of his emotional shadows. "It's a two-way healing," Aaron wrote in his journal one night, watching the two of them sleeping peacefully in the living room. She helps him face the darkness, and he teaches her to trust in a light she cannot see. The aroma of cinnamon and apple filled the Blake house most afternoons. Nora Green, in her floral apron, had become a presence as constant as the Ridgefield seasons. The neighbor brought not only pies and homemade cookies, but also stories that filled the home's silence with a long-forgotten warmth. "My Harold loved these recipes," she commented one afternoon, serving generous slices of pie on plates she'd brought from her own kitchen. "It's been 5 years since he passed, and I still bake as if I expect him to walk through that door." Laya, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate, smiled as she listened to the older woman's voice. Shadow lay faithfully beside the girl's chair, his snout occasionally brushing her fingers in search of a caress. "My children call on Christmas and birthdays," Nora continued, tucking a strand of gray hair into place. "Thomas is in Seattle with his family, and Rebecca is in Chicago with her work. Do you know what it's like to have a house so empty after it was so full of noise?" Aaron, who usually kept his distance during these visits, began to stay in the room longer when Mrs. Green came by. The chief watched how his neighbor treated Laya with a natural ease, free from the weight of pity that other adults carried when speaking to his daughter. "You play beautifully," Nora praised, after Laya finished a piece on the piano. "My mother used to say that music is the language we all understand, even when words fail us." On one of these afternoons, while Aaron was at work, the neighbor brought over old photo albums of Ridgefield. She described each image with details so vivid that Leia could almost see them through her words. "You know, dear," the woman said, taking the girl's hands in hers, "I lost the sight in my left eye when I was about your age. A silly accident. For years, I was afraid people would only see that one imperfection." Shadow, sensing the shift in the conversation's tone, lifted his head and rested his muzzle on Leia's lap. "But Harold taught me that true love sees beyond the eyes," Nora finished, her voice thick with emotion. Laya, with a sensitivity that seemed amplified by her lack of sight, reached out her fingers until they found the older woman's face. In that gentle touch, in the warmth of those wrinkled hands, the girl recognized something that had been missing from her life since the accident. The uncomplicated, sincere affection of a mother, which asked for nothing in return. The Blake house, once a silent refuge of restrained grief, was beginning to transform. Mrs. Green brought with her not just the scent of baked goods, but the forgotten fragrance of a home. The summer heat arrived in Ridgefield, bringing not only longer days, but also a wave of unease that spread like whispers among the residents. Aaron Blake studied the map on the wall of the police station, where small pins marked the locations of break-ins that had occurred over the past few weeks. 5 cases in less than a month, unheard of for the quiet Colorado town. "Any pattern, Chief?" asked Officer Carlos Duarte, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Aaron ran a hand over his tired face. Sleepless nights were adding to the mounting pressure from work. Empty houses, always at night. No witnesses. The invader knew exactly when to strike. At home, the tension was a quiet, suffocating presence. Laya could sense her father's worry in the deepening timbre of his voice, in the frequent, heavy sighs, and in the groan of the floorboards as he paced through the house in the dead of night. On one particularly hot morning, as the sheriff pinned his badge to his uniform shirt, Shadow rose abruptly. The German shepherd, who usually remained a calm anchor by the girl's side, stood at full alert, his ears pricked, his eyes locked on the glint of metal. "He recognizes it," Leia commented, the air thick with unspoken history. "It's like he remembers being a police dog." Her father, Aaron, watched the animal with a flicker of curiosity. Maybe the instinct is still there. In the days that followed, Shadow's behavior shifted. Whenever Aaron returned from work, carrying the scent of crime scenes on his clothes, the dog would sniff him with a renewed professional interest. Beside Laya, he became more vigilant, especially when they were in the garden or near a window. Mrs. Green noticed the change when she visited with a freshly baked apple pie. "That animal is on guard duty," she remarked, watching how Shadow strategically positioned himself between Laya and the door. "My husband used to say police dogs never lose their training." One afternoon, as Aaron reviewed reports at the kitchen table, he noticed Shadow staring intently at the back window. The fur on his neck bristled. The sheriff rose slowly and went to look. There was nothing visible, but the fence of the Wilsons' house, 3 doors down, bore fresh scuff marks. "You smelled something, didn't you, boy?" he murmured to the dog, who held his tense posture. That night, Aaron called Dr. Jenna Martins. "What do you know about Shadow's past as a K-9? "Only that he was a detection specialist," the veterinarian replied. "Why?" "Because I think he's trying to tell us something," Aaron concluded, watching the dog settle protectively at Laya's feet as she played the piano, his watchful eyes never leaving the front door. The sky over Ridgefield darkened with the unnatural speed of a summer storm. Lightning split the horizon as heavy clouds gathered over the small Colorado town. Laya Blake sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys with the familiarity of someone who sees through touch. The first drops of rain began to drum against the roof, a natural percussion accompanying the melody. Shadow, usually soothed by her music, was restless. The German shepherd paced from window to window, his body coiled, his ears twitching at every sound. His nervous steps made the wooden floorboards creak softly. "It's okay, boy," Laya said, interrupting her song and holding a hand out into the air. The dog padded over, pressing his wet nose into her fingers, but soon resumed his patrol. From the kitchen, Mrs. Nora Green watched them as she prepared hot chocolate. The neighbor had promised Aaron she would stay with his daughter during his night shift. "This storm is getting fierce," she said, placing a warm mug in Laya's hands. "Your father called. Said he'll be a little late. A few incidents because of the weather." A particularly loud thunderclap rattled the windows. Shadow let out a low whine, planting himself between Laya and the front door. "I've never heard him like this," the teenager murmured, stroking his fur. "It feels like he's waiting for something." Mrs. Green sat beside her on the piano bench. "These animals have a sixth sense, dear. Maybe it's just the storm." But it wasn't just the storm. Even with the downpour, Shadow remained on duty, a sentry from his police days. His taut muscles and controlled breathing were a testament to forgotten training. Laya returned to the instrument, playing a soft melody to soothe herself and the dog. The music flowed through the house, a fragile defense against the rain now lashing at the glass. "I think I'll just check that all the doors are locked," Mrs. Green said, rising with a worried sigh. Laya nodded, her fingers never ceasing their dance as the weight of the storm pressed in. Shadow finally lay at her feet, but his head remained up, ears swiveling, a radar in the dark. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Sheriff Blake navigated the storm in his patrol car, unaware that the real danger wasn't on the flooded streets of Ridgefield, but closing in on his own home. Laya felt a chill crawl up her spine. Her fingers faltered on the piano keys. Something in the air had shifted, something beyond the thunder and the rain. Shadow shot to his feet, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The uneasy premonition that had been hanging in the air was finally taking shape. The rain hammered the Blake house as the invader forced the back entrance. The hooded man moved with a grim purpose, each step sure and familiar. The darkness was his ally. Laya's sensitive fingers caught a new vibration through the floorboards. It wasn't the familiar shuffle of Mrs. Green, who had gone to the kitchen to make tea. This was heavier, stealthier. She stopped playing, tilting her head to listen. "Is someone there?" she whispered, her heart beginning to race. With calculated silence, she slid off the bench and crouched behind the piano. Shadow, who had been lying nearby, was already in motion. His body was a coiled spring of pure alert. He moved toward the living room as the intruder began to rifle through drawers, searching for something specific. When the man approached the piano, Shadow did not hesitate. With a deep-throated snarl that seemed to rise from the very soul of a protector, the dog launched himself at the hooded figure. "Get off me, you damn dog!" the intruder yelled, pulling a hunting knife from his pocket. The steel flashed in the brief, stark light of a lightning strike. The clash was violent and swift. Shadow, lacking the full vigor of his prime, fought with the renewed strength of one defending his family. His teeth clamped down on the intruder's arm, who retaliated with desperate slashes of the blade. A sharp yelp cut through the air as the knife found the dog's flank. Wounded, Shadow did not retreat. He pressed his attack, a wall of fur and fury between the man and the girl hiding behind the piano. "Shadow!" Laya cried out, the metallic scent of blood reaching her. She wanted to help, but knew exposing herself was exactly what the dog was trying to prevent. Hearing the commotion, Mrs. Green fumbled for the kitchen phone, her trembling fingers dialing the sheriff's department. The intruder, realizing his mission was compromised and bleeding from the dog's attack, kicked Shadow one last time and fled for the back door. The German shepherd tried to give chase, but his paws slipped in the growing pool of his own blood on the hardwood floor. Laya crawled toward him, guided by the sound of his ragged breaths. When her fingers touched his damp, sticky fur, tears streamed down her face. "You saved me," she whispered, hugging Shadow's trembling body. "Hold on, please. Dad's on his way." Aaron Blake's phone rang in the middle of the storm. The frantic voice of Nora Green on the other end sent ice through his veins. "Aaron, someone's in your house. I saw a shadow break in the back window." His heart hammered against his ribs as he wrenched the wheel, the patrol car skidding on the wet asphalt. Hitting the siren, he radioed his deputy, Carlos Duarte. "Intruder at my house. Laya's there. Need backup, now." "On my way, partner." Carlos's voice crackled back instantly. When Aaron arrived, he saw a hooded figure vaulting the back fence. The rain fell in merciless sheets, blurring his vision. Without a second thought, he gave chase, slipping in the mud as he yelled for the man to stop. Carlos's car screeched to a halt seconds later, blocking the side street. Pinned between the two officers, the intruder tried to scale a wall, but Aaron tackled him, bringing him down hard. The struggle was brief but fierce, until Carlos helped restrain him. "Laya, I have to see my daughter," Aaron gasped, as his partner cuffed the criminal. "Go, I've got him," Carlos assured him. Aaron sprinted back to the house to find Mrs. Green holding a shivering but physically unharmed Laya on the porch. "Shadow, he's bleeding so much," she whispered, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "He saved me, Dad." Inside, the German shepherd lay in a heap by the piano. Aaron knelt beside him, his hand gentle on the blood-matted fur. When Carlos brought the cuffed man toward the squad car, The light finally illuminated his face. The recognition was a sickening jolt. Michael Danton, Aaron breathed. The dealer from the Riverstone case. Carlos stared. The same case that... Aaron nodded grimly. The one that cost Officer Peterson, Shadow's old partner, his life. In that moment, everything clicked into place. The invasion wasn't random. It was calculated revenge against the K-9 who had helped dismantle Danton's operation years ago. Aaron looked back at his house where Laya was now cradling Shadow's head in her lap, humming softly to him. "We need to get him to Dr. Martin's clinic, immediately," the sheriff said, his voice raw with determination. The story was far from over, but one thing was certain. Shadow had proven his worth once more, finishing the mission his first partner never could. The wail of the siren sliced through the rainy night as Aaron raced through the streets of Ridgefield. In the back seat, Laya held Shadow's head, her trembling fingers stroking his blood-soaked fur. The dog's breaths were shallow, each one weaker than the last. "Is he going to be okay, Daddy?" she asked, her voice choked with fear. Aaron couldn't answer. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he took the final turn toward the veterinary clinic. Carlos was already there, having called Dr. Jenna Martins ahead of time. "In here, quickly!" The vet was already in her scrubs. She and Carlos carried the heavy, limp body of the dog into the operating room. Dr. Martins worked for hours, while father and daughter waited in the cold silence of the reception area. "He saved my life," Laya whispered. "He knew the man was there before I did." News traveled fast in the small town. Before dawn, the waiting room was filled with worried faces. Nora Green arrived with a thermos of hot coffee. The woman from the shelter, Joanna, came with tears in her eyes, remembering how Shadow had been deemed unrecoverable. "It's like he found his purpose again," she said. The community rallied. A donation box appeared on the counter, quickly filling with cash. Families dropped off homemade meals. When Dr. Martins finally emerged, exhaustion was etched on her face. "He lost a lot of blood, but he's a fighter," she explained. "The next 48 hours are critical." Laya refused to leave. Aaron brought her small portable keyboard from home, and she began to play softly beside the recovery kennel where Shadow lay. The delicate melodies filled the clinic, a fragile soundtrack of hope. "The music helps him know I'm here," she told anyone who asked. A silent vigil formed around the clinic, a testament to the town's love for its four-legged hero. Shadow wasn't just fighting for his own life. He was fighting for the new family that had given him a reason to live it. Later, sitting on the edge of Laya's bed, Aaron held a cup of hot chocolate in his trembling hands. Shadow was asleep at their feet, his breathing still labored. "I almost lost you both," the sheriff murmured, his voice breaking in the quiet of the room. "And I realized I've already lost too much time hiding." Laya reached out, her small, firm fingers finding his. "I never told you everything about that night," Aaron continued, the words heavy with long-held guilt. "About the accident. I was on the phone arguing about a case when the truck came out of nowhere. If I'd been paying attention, if I'd just been a second faster..." The girl shifted on the bed, turning her face toward the sound of her father's voice, as if she could finally see him clearly. "Your mother died instantly. And you, when I saw you in that hospital bed, and the doctors said you would never see again, something inside of me died, too. I couldn't protect you. I failed as a father, as a husband, as everything." Silence hung between them for a few heartbeats before Aaron continued. "Every day since I've lived in fear. Fear of failing again, of losing you, too. That's why I pulled away. It was easier than facing what I had done. Shadow shifted, restless, as if sensing the tension in the air. Laya reached out her free hand to stroke the dog's fur. "Dad," she said at last, her voice soft but firm. "I never blamed you. Not for a second." "How could you not? I destroyed our family." "It was an accident," Laya replied. "And while you were pulling away, I was waiting for you to come back to me." Tears streamed down Aaron's face as his daughter leaned in to embrace him. The sheriff held her tight, as if trying to reclaim all the hugs lost over the years. "I forgave you a long time ago," she whispered against his shoulder. "I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." Shadow drew closer, nudging his nose against Aaron's hand. The man hesitated for a moment, before stroking the animal's head. "Looks like he's willing to give me a chance, too," he said, with a fragile smile. "We're all broken in our own way," Laya answered. "But we're fixing each other, aren't we?" That night, for the first time in years, Aaron Blake fell asleep without the crushing weight of guilt. The silence that had once separated them was now just the quiet space between people who had finally found their way back to one another. After 5 days of anguish and prayer, Shadow finally opened his eyes. Dr. Jenna Martin smiled as she checked the German Shepherd's vital signs. He was breathing stronger now. The scars from the surgery were still stark against his body, but the light had returned to his eyes. "It's a true miracle," the veterinarian declared, adjusting her glasses as she made notes on his chart. "I've never seen a dog fight so hard for his life." Laya Blake had remained by his side throughout the entire ordeal. The young woman refused to leave the clinic, sleeping in a makeshift chair and playing soft melodies on a small keyboard her father had brought from home. Her dedication amazed even the clinic's most seasoned staff. Her presence was crucial, Jenna explained to the local news reporters who had gathered at the entrance. Shadow visibly responded to Laya's voice and touch. It was as if he knew he had to come back for her. News of the dog's recovery spread through Ridgefield like wildfire. Residents who had never exchanged more than a polite nod with the Blake family now left flowers, cards, and even decorated food bowls at the clinic's door. Mrs. Nora Green organized a support group that took turns bringing hot meals for the girl and her father. "This dog didn't just save Laya," the neighbor remarked, while handing out cinnamon rolls to volunteers. "He brought our community together in a way we haven't seen in decades." The Ridgefield Chronicle dedicated its front page to the story. "Four-legged hero, the police dog who found a new mission," read the headline above a photo of Laya stroking Shadow's head. The article highlighted not only the animal's courage but also the determination of the blind girl who had seen beyond his scars. Watching the scene from the clinic doorway, Aaron Blake felt a lump form in his throat. The sheriff, who had sealed himself away in his grief for so long, now saw his family surrounded by affection. He folded a copy of the newspaper and tucked it into his jacket pocket, vowing to keep it as a reminder of this moment. When Shadow was finally discharged, a small crowd was waiting on the sidewalk. Applause erupted as Laya guided the dog outside, her hand firm on his leash. The dog, still walking with a slight hesitation, stayed close to the girl, as if he understood they had overcome something extraordinary together. "He's not just a guide dog anymore," Laya whispered to her father as they walked home. "He's our family." The golden autumn leaves danced in the air as Ridgefield prepared for its traditional Hope Parade. This year, however, it held a special meaning. Aaron Blake adjusted his shirt collar, watching as Laya fitted Shadow's harness, her nimble fingers moving with practiced familiarity over the dog's fur. "Are you two ready?" he asked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. The sheriff had never liked being the center of attention, but today was different. The entire town wanted to honor not only his work in capturing the fugitive, but more importantly, the extraordinary story of love that had healed his family. When they arrived on Main Street, they were greeted by Deputy Carlos Duarte, who led them to a car decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons. "The car of honor is waiting for you," the deputy said with a proud grin. Shadow, who once flinched at the slightest sound, now walked with a confident posture beside Laya. The German Shepherd had transformed just as much as his humans had in the past few months. The parade began with the sound of the local high school band. As their vehicle moved slowly down the main avenue, residents cheered and waved. Some held signs with messages of support. Others simply smiled, tears welling in their eyes. Laya, sensing the energy around her, beamed. She held Shadow's leash with one hand and waved with the other, her face illuminated by a joy Aaron hadn't seen in years. "Look how many people came," he whispered, describing the scene for his daughter. "It must be the whole town." "I can feel it," she replied, tilting her head to catch the autumn sun. "It feels like they're all hugging us." In front of Town Hall, the car stopped. Nora Green approached, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. The neighbor, who had become an essential part of the Blake family, had tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "You three are the real miracle of Ridgefield," she said, handing the flowers to Laya. The mayor gave a brief speech about courage and community, but the most touching moment came when he mentioned the pendant Laya wore. "Love sees beyond the eyes," he quoted, gesturing to the silver charm that glinted in the sun. This message represents not only the remarkable story of this family, but the very spirit of our town. Aaron looked out at the crowd, recognizing familiar faces. Joanna from the shelter, Dr. Jenna Martin, who had saved Shadow, and dozens of other residents who had reached out when they needed it most. In that moment, with Shadow resting his head on Laya's lap and the autumn sun warming their faces, Aaron Blake finally understood the true meaning of home. A year later, snow fell in thick flakes, blanketing Ridgefield in a soft, white mantle. But inside the Blake house, the cold silence of the past was gone. Aaron Blake watched the storm from the window as he wrote in his journal. The words now flowed freely, unburdened by the guilt he had carried for so long. He smiled, listening to the notes of the piano filling the room. Laya was playing a gentle melody, a composition of her own that spoke of new beginnings. Beside her, Shadow lay like a faithful guardian, his powerful body relaxed, his ears twitching occasionally to the rhythm of the music. The German Shepherd, once deemed beyond saving, was now the quiet protector of their home. "I think it's time for hot chocolate," Aaron announced, closing his journal. Laya's fingers paused on the keys. "With extra marshmallows?" she asked with a grin. "Always," he replied. Mrs. Green, who had become a fixture in their lives, had left a fresh batch of cinnamon cookies that morning. In the kitchen, Aaron felt Shadow's presence beside him. The dog watched him with attentive, trusting eyes. Aaron reached down, and Shadow leaned into his touch without hesitation. "Thank you," Aaron murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "for protecting her." Back in the living room, the three of them settled near the warmth of the fireplace. Laya's fingers toyed with the pendant around her neck, its inscription a truth she now knew by heart. Love sees beyond the eyes. It was the foundation of their new life. "Dad," she asked, her voice soft in the comfortable quiet, "do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Aaron took a deep breath. "I'm sure of it, sweetheart. She always believed in second chances." As the snow continued to fall, cocooning them from the world, the small family felt a warmth that came not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding that their scars, though still present, no longer had power over them. Aaron had learned that to protect meant to trust. Laya had discovered that true sight comes from the heart. And Shadow had finally found the home and purpose he had been waiting for his entire life. On that winter night, under the starry Colorado sky, three once shattered souls knew they were whole again, healed by a love that had proven strong enough to mend even the deepest of wounds.